I swore to myself I wouldn't open the door again. Not the one to the house, nor the one to my heart. Not after him, not after the way it all ended, or rather, the way it just vanished, because there wasn't an ending, just a brutal, sudden silence that seeped into every corner of my life. He left one ordinary morning taking only a suitcase and the words that never came back. No letter, no note, no explanation. Just absence. Heavy, painful, invisible to others but present in every detail of my daily life. On the outside, I carried on. I put on the armor of the independent woman, kept up with work, reorganized the apartment, made a point of staying composed. I changed the flowers on the balcony, rearranged the furniture, painted the front door a light blue as if I could erase any trace of him from there. But it's impossible to rip out of your soul what was planted with so much feeling, because he didn't just take his things. He took plans, laughter, the future we whispered about before falling asleep. He took the most alive part of me. And even as the months passed, even as the days started to feel normal, there was always a moment, a single moment, when it all came rushing back. When I heard the doorbell, my entire body froze. It was irrational, almost ridiculous, but my heart leapt in my chest as if it still expected it to be him. As if it believed that after everything, the disappearance, the cowardice, the pain, he could be standing there on the other side. And that's what tortured me most. The fact that despite it all, a part of me, the deepest, most fragile, most honest part, still loved him. A love I buried alive, tried to suffocate with, silence dressed up with wounded pride, but that even so, still breathed within me. Over time, I learned to live with that absence the way you learn to walk with chronic pain. It doesn't go away, but you adapt to it. I became functional. I worked, smiled at the neighbors, kept the bills in order, organized my life down to the smallest details to leave no room for chaos. But inside, there was a mess no one saw. Tiny memories hid in the most unexpected corners. The coffee mug he used was still tucked away in the top cabinet, the one I said was too old, and he insisted made the coffee taste real. An old note, scribbled in haste on a scrap of paper, still slept in the bottom of my book drawer, his handwriting saying, "Back soon. Wait for me with that smile of yours." The smile he broke. Sometimes I'd catch myself listening to a random song on the radio, and suddenly I was back in that car with him, on a road to nowhere, just because we loved each other's company. Simple moments, but they stuck to me with the force of someone who left things unsaid. My friends told me I needed to move on, to make space for something new, and I tried. I went on dates, answered messages, left flowers on the table waiting for someone else, but no one got in. Because that door I painted light blue was, on the inside, still locked, and not just any key would open it. I didn't need pretty promises, romantic texts, or someone saying they'd heal me. I just wanted truth. And the truth was that my heart still called out a name I pretended not to remember. There was still a voice I heard in the silence, a touch my skin hadn't forgotten. I was living, but not fully. It was like being awake in a black and white dream, waiting for the impossible chance that the colors might return one day, even if it was late, even if it hurt, even if I wouldn't admit it, not even to myself. It was one of those afternoons that promise nothing, the kind of day when the sky is dull, as if even it has grown tired of waiting for change. I was home alone, as I often was. The TV was on with no sound, just to fake some presence. The kettle was on the stove, the smell of the same tea I'd been making for months, as if repeating routines could build a sense of stability. I didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up along with hope. And that's what hurts most. When you stop expecting, when absence becomes so familiar you stop fighting it. That afternoon, I opened one of the desk drawers, not looking for anything specific, but because that's how I filled the voids. I found an old wooden box, one I'd sworn never to open again. But promises made in pain are fragile. Inside were memories that had withstood time, a photo of a late afternoon in Charleston, where he looked at me as if I were the answer to every question he never dared ask, a short note, written in a hurry, saying he'd pick me up at 7, as if just being together was enough. And it was. For a while it was. And even knowing those papers, those words, that picture belonged to a past that hurt me. I couldn't throw them away. I put everything back, hands trembling, chest tight. I climbed the stairs in silence and sat in the armchair that held his scent for weeks after he left. I pretended not to remember, but my body never forgot. And it was then, in the middle of that forced peace, in the heart of that silent routine, that I heard the sound. The doorbell, once, twice. An ordinary, harmless sound to anyone else. But to me, it was the world stopping. My breath caught in my chest. I sat there for a moment, frozen. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. It wasn't the neighbor, the mailman, or a mistake. It was him. The same intuition that told me he was leaving now screamed that he was back. Every step to the door was a battle against myself. I wanted to run, to protect myself, to not open it. But more than that, I wanted to see if it was true, to see if it was him. When I opened the door, time didn't stop, but inside me, everything went quiet. He was there, older, thinner, with tired eyes and shoulders bowed by time and all that was left unsaid. There was no music, no dramatic sky, no poetic lines, just him. And two words that tore through everything I'd spent months stitching together. I'm back. And in that moment there was no forgiveness, no anger, just a raw reunion between who I'd become and everything that still existed between us. I should have said something, anything. I could have asked why he vanished, why it took so long, why he had the courage to leave and now the courage to return. But my mouth didn't move. My throat, dry, seemed to have forgotten how words are formed. My eyes just searched him, as if to confirm he wasn't a ghost. And maybe he was. A ghost of everything I'd buried inside me, now standing alive, breathing, right in front of me. He didn't come in, not yet. He stood there, shoulders slightly slumped, as if asking permission to exist. The silence between us was thick, not uncomfortable but heavy. A silence that said, "We have so much to talk about, but now isn't the time." For a moment I wanted to close the door, to protect the little I'd rebuilt with so much effort. But my fingers didn't obey. My whole body said otherwise. I stepped aside and made space, and he came in. He entered like someone returning to a place they still recognize, but fear they're no longer welcome. He sat in the same armchair where I'd spent so many nights crying alone, and that alone was symbolic enough. We stayed there for minutes that felt like hours, looking at everything except each other. When I finally spoke, my voice came out low, almost a whisper, but firm. "Why?" That was all I could manage, and with that, I opened the floodgates. He took a deep breath, as if carrying in his chest the weight of every day he'd been gone, and he started talking. He said he wasn't here with excuses or easy justifications. He said that back then, he was too cowardly to admit he was lost, that he felt he wasn't enough, that the love he felt for me scared him, not for its intensity, but for the responsibility of reciprocating it fully. He told me he tried to move on, to forget, to take other paths, but everything led back to me. And these weren't words spoken with cheap romanticism or rehearsed movie lines. They were words that came with truth, with pain, with stumbles, words from someone who'd been beaten by time. I listened in silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to interrupt what I'd waited so long to hear. Inside, there was confusion. My heart wanted to run to him, to nestle in that chest where it once felt at home. But my mind was at war with reason, because forgiveness isn't a gesture, it's a process. And loving, when you carry scars, is an act of courage. In the days that followed, he became part of my landscape again. Not like before, with the comfort of routine and the lightness of spontaneous gestures, but as a careful, almost restrained presence, like someone stepping on sacred ground they'd once violated. There was a strange intimacy between us, the kind that only exists between two people who once loved deeply and at the same time are afraid to touch. We talked for hours, unhurried, as if we were two strangers trying to remember how to be us. Sometimes he came over for afternoon coffee. Other times, he stayed late just to watch the sky darken from the porch. And in those shared silences, things we never said when we were together started to surface. He spoke about his loneliness, his attempts to fill the void he left by leaving, the places he wandered trying to escape himself. I spoke less, not for lack of things to say, but because every word of mine had to pass through the ruins he'd left behind. Part of me wanted to dive back into that love, but another part, the one born from pain, still put fences around what remained of my heart. One night, he asked if I still loved him, not with arrogance, but with fear, like someone who knows the answer could change everything. I didn't respond. I just looked at him, my eyes full of memories, of him grabbing my waist in the kitchen, saying my laugh was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard, promising he'd never leave, but also of the sleepless nights alone, the desperation of staring at an empty phone, the pain of explaining his absence to others without seeming weak. I did love him, yes. I still loved him. But love alone wasn't enough anymore, because love on its own doesn't erase what was torn. Love, when it returns, needs to come with something deeper, commitment, genuine regret, a willingness to rebuild what was left in ruins. And he seemed to understand that. He never pressured me, never demanded answers. He was just there, waiting. And maybe that was the strongest gesture of all, staying. After having left, he was now there, simply staying, waiting for me to decide, to feel, to open up or not. For the first time, he gave me the time I needed, and that time, paradoxically, began to heal what time had only wounded before. It was on a cold Thursday night, one of those when the silence of the house feels bigger, denser, almost alive, that everything inside me tightened for good. I was lying in bed, but couldn't sleep. I stared at the dark ceiling, feeling my chest heavy, as if there was something unsaid I didn't even know how to name. I'd spent the last few days living in this limbo between fear and hope, between memories of what we were and signs of what we might still be. He was there, present, but different. No longer the same man who left. There was maturity in his gaze, truth in his words, humility in his silence. But was that enough? I felt like someone standing before a rebuilt bridge, still remembering the moment it collapsed. It was hard to trust the ground again after spending so long falling. I got out of bed, walked through the dark house, touched the furniture he helped choose, the frame of the photo I kept with shame, the small details that survived the renovation I tried to do within myself. And I realized, with a lump in my throat, that I'd never managed to rip him out of there. That no matter how many doors I closed, locks I changed, or walls I painted, he was always here. Not as a presence, but as a root. The next morning I asked him to come over, not on impulse, but with certainty. When he walked in, I saw on his face the same apprehension I saw in my mirrors. He sat across from me, silent, and that's when I finally spoke. I talked about everything, the sleepless nights, the pain that consumed me, the anger I felt, the grief I lived through for someone who was still alive. I talked about the loneliness of having to rebuild myself while loving him in silence. I talked about the shame I felt for still missing him. And after all that, I said yes, that I still loved him, but my love now came with demands, that I wasn't the same anymore, that there was no room for empty promises or half-presences, that if he wanted to stay, he'd have to learn to love me again in the time it takes for me to open up. He listened without interrupting. When I said the last word, he reached out his hand, and I hesitantly placed mine over his. And in that simple, fragile, but courageous gesture, I understood that love, the real, mature kind, the one that survives pain, doesn't demand guarantees. It demands presence. And for the first time, he was willing to be whole. The days that followed weren't made of promises or passionate kisses under the sunset. It wasn't like the movies. And honestly, I didn't want it to be. Because this time, I needed something real. Not sweet words spoken in the heat of emotion, but consistent actions, daily presence, silent truth. And he stayed. Not, like before, trying to fill the spaces with flowers or dinners or compliments, but staying simply, helping make dinner, cleaning the porch with me in silence, gently brushing my shoulder when he noticed I was lost in thought. He stayed even when I was cold, when I withdrew, when I made it clear, with my body or my eyes, that I wasn't ready yet. And that's what began to heal me. Not idealized love, but patient love. The love that understands some pains aren't in a hurry, that a heart once broken isn't mended with grand gestures but with consistency. And that's how we started to rebuild, not what we had before, but something new, more honest. For the first time, I said things I'd held back for fear of seeming too sensitive. And he listened. Not trying to fix, not offering solutions, just listening. And I listened too. About his failures, his absences, his own fears. And in that process of genuine exchange, our eyes began to meet again, not with the intensity of the passion that once consumed us, but with the steadiness of someone who looks and says, without saying, I see you fully, and I still choose to stay. As the weeks passed, something inside me began to change. Not because of him, but because of me. I started to see myself differently. For the first time, I wasn't asking if I was loved enough, but if I loved myself enough to not accept less than I deserved. And it was in that new inner space that he found a place. A space I built myself, brick by brick, after everything I'd been through. I no longer needed him to complete me. I was whole, and it was that wholeness that made it possible now, to share the journey. I discovered I didn't want a fairy tale happy ending. I wanted real love, the kind that survives silences, pauses, gray days. The kind that doesn't make us lose who we are, but respects each process. He, with all the marks he carried, seemed to understand that. We stopped looking back as if trying to fix what was broken. Instead, we started looking forward as if planting, slowly, a new garden. Sometimes we touched as if asking permission. Sometimes we laughed loudly at something silly, and that laughter tasted like freedom. One day, he fell asleep on the couch, feet crossed, chest rising and falling slowly, and I watched him for minutes. I thought about everything we'd been through, everything we'd overcome, and felt peace. Not that light, easy peace that comes with predictable endings, but a deep, layered peace that comes when you choose to stay, even when you could leave. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't about him coming back anymore. It was about me coming back, to myself, to who I am, to what I deserve. And in a beautiful, unexpected way, he was there too, not as salvation, but as company on that clear sky. Morning he left early to buy fresh bread, a small, almost silly gesture, but one that carried a silent promise. I'm here and I'll keep coming back. I stayed in the kitchen making coffee, listening to the kettle's slow hum. As I stirred sugar into the cup, I noticed I was smiling. Not the forced smile that masks a void, but a light, genuine, almost childlike smile that comes when the soul finds rest. I walked to the living room where the sun softly hit the walls, and for a moment I stopped in front of the front door. The same door he once rushed through to leave, the same one I painted to try to forget, the same one that months ago opened to a trembling voice saying, I'm back. I touched the handle gently as if touching an older version of myself, and it was in that almost insignificant gesture that I realized how much I'd changed. The woman who once shrank in the face of abandonment was now a woman who knew that even if he left again, she'd remain standing, because now I didn't depend on anyone to know who I was or what I deserved. And in that silent realization, in that peace that comes from within, I understood. Love triumphed. Not because everything worked out, not because he came back, not because we had a beautiful new beginning. Love triumphed because I chose myself. And from that, I could choose him without losing myself. When he returned with the bread and the shy smile of someone still surprised to be welcome, he looked at me with the same gaze as in that old photo. But now something was different. Now we both knew. And without needing to say anything more, I opened the door. This time, not to let him in, but to walk together, for real, without fear, without haste, and with enough love to begin again. Not from where it all stopped, but from where it truly begins. Some loves don't come back to repeat the past. They come back to build what never had the chance to grow. Tessa didn't forget the pain. She didn't erase the nights she cried alone, or the silences that cut deeper than any words. But she rebuilt herself. She learned to love without abandoning herself. And when he returned, it wasn't his return that sealed love's victory. It was the woman she became in the process. Love triumphed, yes, but not because everything was perfect. Love triumphed because she chose to keep going, standing tall, heart open. And the door, too.